Good evening, and welcome to this conversation tonight with Oakland's Mayor, Ron V. Dellums. Mayor Dellums, thank you so much for inviting me to your house, Oakland's magnificent City Hall.
Well,
Glad to be
it's a pleasure
here.
to have you.
Thank you so much. You know, I'll start by asking you, after this is the end of 4 years for you as mayor, so what was your intent when you came back? What was your vision in coming back to the city of your birth after almost 35 years of serving this community well as a congressional representative?
Well, first, just to put it in context, I came back to say no. Remember, this was a spontaneous support group that emerged, that went out and sought several thousand signatures to convince me to come home, to run for mayor. And look, I've given you 31 years of my life, and had moved on to another phase in my life. And I decided that just writing a letter would not be me, that would not be respectful. If people went out and worked that hard to gather thousands of signatures, at a minimum, I owed them the respect of a face-to-face no. Huge mistake. Because I got out here and I said, I don't want a press conference. I just want to communicate directly with residents in the community. And there was a point at which I said, look, I lost one family to public life. I know what it is to miss hundreds of events in your family, to become a mystery and a shadow. I knew what that was all about. And I chose the words, remember, politics is a jealous mistress. And at that point, I could see in the audience that people suddenly realized that I was about to say no. And I saw some people up close who literally began to cry. And I looked at my wife, Cynthia, who was on the podium, and she was in tears. And if you go back and look at the film, I was, in tears. And we looked at each other, and we both non-verbally knew in that moment that our lives had changed, that no was not an option in that moment. It was like an out-of-body experience. Suddenly the words just came out. But if Ron Dellums running for mayor gives you hope, then let's get on with it. The place erupts. Several minutes later, I'm getting ready to walk off the stage, Belva, and I go, what have I just done with my life? And so Cynthia and I literally made a decision of the heart, not of the head. We didn't do due diligence. I was born here 75 years ago. My mother came here in the 1921. My folks came here right after the turn of the last century, in the early 1900s. So this has been our home for 100 years. And so it was love of community, but even more importantly, commitment to public service. Suddenly there I was. And so now I have to run, and I won, and I have to be the mayor. So what I said to people was, we need a vision. We're all inspired by vision. We're all informed by having a sense of where it is you're trying to go. So I said, then let's seek a vision. And I termed it the vision of a model city. And my definition of that was very succinct. I said, a model city is a city that is cohesive and coherent, a city that's rooted in a vibrant economy, a city that's based on a healthy citizenry, well-educated, well-trained, well-informed, capable of effective interaction with the various institutions of our community. So it was with that vision in mind that I wanted to try to go forward. Okay,
let me interrupt you for a moment, because with even those very good reasons, I'm going to read off of a piece of paper here because these are some pretty important things. It's still hard to understand how you could come back as a member of Congress who had an unmatched record, legislative record. You were the chairman of the Armed Services Committee while doing double duty at the same time. You were working for peace and disarmament. You were an expert on both military and foreign policy. You led the drive to end apartheid in South Africa. You put forth one of the most comprehensive health care pieces of legislation that's ever been written back in 1977. That fight's still going on, but you did it. UC Berkeley had just named a chair in your honor, centered on peace and conflict studies. I mean, those are all pretty heady things that you had on your plate already of having to accomplish. So being emotionally driven, and you said you hadn't done due diligence, had you even thought about what it would take to make this work?
Well, I thought about it at the political level, because that's who I am. I get up in the morning thinking politically. You know, people who know me, I spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about things. And I view the world through that prism. I'm one of the last of a dying breed, and that's, you know, someone whose politics were honed in the Bay Area in the 60s. And not many of us still around who were inspired by the Martin Luther Kings and others to have the audacity to try to change the world. It was out of that spirit, all right? Now, I felt that I had done enough. Some people have never given 31 minutes to community. I gave 31 years of my life. You know, half of my life I'd given to public service. When you add my military service and my psychiatric social worker service, over half my life I had given to public service. So I'm committed to that, driven by that. Our generation was inspired by all of that. I thought that I had given enough. What I'm saying to you is that I did not come back here for self-aggrandizement, ego trip, power plays, or career move. I responded to a call to service. And people said, Ron, the way the table is set right now, we want another candidate. Will you come do this? So I thought about, well, what would I do if I were running? And what would I do if I were the mayor? All right? That was the easy part. The difficult part is all the other things that come to play. You and I both know. Like, people see you on television, they see, but we're not one-dimensional people. We're not one adjective. My mother told me when I was 12 years old, you're 1,000 adjectives. That was very illuminating, okay? And she said, you're a very complicated, complex human being. So you bring all of that to the table. People tend to see you one-dimensionally. The personal side of this, all right? I'm married. I have a mate. I have a person that I deeply and profoundly respect intellectually. We share a vision of community together. We have human issues. We have financial issues. We have all of those things. That aspect, those aspects of it, I didn't have time to think through. The political side of it, I had time to think through. I said, okay, if I'm going to do this, what would I do? Final point in that, I realized as mayor, very different from being a legislator, because as a legislator and a policy person, I had time to think and be deliberative. You know, when you're the mayor, things happen quickly, and you have to move very quickly. So I had to learn on the dead run how to be a mayor, just like Obama had to learn how to be a president. I mean, you have to. There's no school for this. You learn on the streets. Okay, so. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I had a record, and every now and then in my more painful moments, I go, why didn't I quit when I was ahead? But it wasn't in me to say no at that point. I was simply and singularly responding to a call to service. It had nothing to do with me wanting to come be the mayor. That was the last thing in my mind, okay? So that's how I responded. If I might just add parenthetically, and you and I have had this conversation about how you tell your story, and you know, one day you told me, you say, you're a little naive, Ron. You can't just do your job, you've got to tell people. Well, I thought, and this was the naive part of me, that if people realized that I came home to respond to a call to public service, that I would be evaluated not as a petty politician, self-serving, you know, the stereotypes. But it became too easy for people to see you through that very stereotype prism rather than to sense that that wasn't the reason that brought me here.
Well, Oakland is a very diverse city, a very demanding city in terms of its needs and its expectations. It's a place where a lot of people have come to see their dreams realized. Your record, as we talked about, is one that's very distinguished. But I think you've hit on something. Were those skills that you honed so sharply in Washington of much use to you in a chair where people were expecting a 15-second answer to complex questions?
No, that's a wonderful question. On the one hand, I would say yes, because having a larger vision allows you to see the local situation in proper context. I might recall that, I might point out to you that one of the local newspapers, when I was campaigning, one of the high muckety mucks in the newspaper looked across the table at me and he said, "You have the reputation of being a big thinker." He said, "Hell, we don't need big thinkers in Oakland as mayor. We need somebody to fill the potholes and paint the signs." And I thought to myself, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? But I think that having a broader vision is important because it allows you to see Oakland in proper context. Oakland does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in a larger context. I'm trained to see that. Where I had to learn on the run was that you got to make moves very, very quickly. That broader vision, interestingly enough, was helpful to me in the second part of the term. All right? In the first 2 years, I had no partner in the White House. They were all prosecuting a war, okay? At a time when the cities we had to deal with issues in the cities. But 2 years later, along comes this tall, skinny guy from Chicago who becomes the president, who gets it, who understands that the federal government needed to partner with the cities. Well, that experience at the federal level came to play because I knew Washington and I knew how to convey the ideas of what Washington needed in a policy framework that hopefully would be positive toward Oakland.